Hi, I'm Rachel Losser, founder and CEO of Losser Consulting Solutions, and you're listening to Big Project Energy. The podcast where we talk about controlling chaos, managing teams, and driving real project success. I am over the moon excited to be talking to John today. John and I met through Shareholders Society, and it's been a really fun group, and we hit it off right away talking about project management. Just to orient the group, can you just give the usual little what do you do? Why are we talking?
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here, by the way. And it was good meeting you at Shareholders. Looking forward to the next one. What I do. So 28 plus years now, I do federal IT project management consulting, which sounds fancy, but mostly it's what it sounds like. That is professional janitor work. They tackle very complicated projects and then they need help actually executing what they promised. So that's my job, is to help them execute what they promised.
Brilliant. And I am super excited, was excited, and continue to be excited to talk to you because a lot of my experience is in the corporate world. So, as we kind of discussed, the government, sector is a whole different beast, but a lot of the principles are still the same. If you wouldn't mind, just so that folks can kind of orient themselves, can you just speak to some of the maybe top three differences between what you'd see in a corporate project versus some of these kind of government projects?
Yeah, so some of the big things, not necessarily in this order, in the federal space, one of the big problems is, right, their perspective on money. They don't see money as a driver of things, right? So they receive a budget, they have to spend it no matter what, and they're going to be asking for more next year. And so money comes out of the equation, which is very odd from a commercial perspective because it's all about, let's do this, let's make money, let's do these things. Federal does not look at it that way. And that makes a couple of things different. Their perspective on timelines is different. Their perspective on when things need to get done is different. How good is good enough is different. So you wind up with a lot of things. That's one big difference. The other big difference is who is actually important as a stakeholder is very different. So you're going to have the people that signed up to do it, but they have to answer to a whole bunch of people that are either named or not named. And you got to figure out who the ones are that matter quickly, and then start giving the ones that matter what they need. And it is not obvious from their titles or their labels. And I think the third thing is the stakeholders that do get engaged, they tend to be focused on things that are important to them, but not necessarily important to the delivery. And then you have to detangle them a little bit. I'm having that problem right now. My current stakeholder is very focused on what she wants to pay attention to. Those aren't the things that are going to bite her at the end of the day. So you got to help them navigate that. And it's a challenge because they don't, no, this is what's important. It's kind of important. This actually is the thing that's going to get you. And it has to be their idea, by the way. All this has to be done with their idea. If it's just you telling them, that's not going to fly. So that's a starting point, I think, Rachel, of what I see different.
No, that rings true. And I think it's funny because the stakeholder management piece, I think no matter how you slice it, it's one of the biggest challenges. I don't think we, in our past conversations, I don't think we talked about it a ton, but I'd love for you to just kind of going along that path. I'm really intrigued in sort of the politics of the project manager and the politics of the project. And I was wondering if you can give some insight into, what I often refer to as doing the dance, and can you talk a little bit about what is your approach? How do you see it?
Yeah. And so I'll use specifics without names, and I'll go back a couple projects so that we can keep folks clear and clean. That politics thing, right? So there's that typical discussion about, it's people and process and technology. Sure. But the people portion is 98% of it. Everything else is the process and technology. And to your comment about the politics, if I go back a couple of projects, and I won't name the name, the issue was the key stakeholder. He was powerful and he was trying to drive a massive change. But the politics underlying, there were about 42 different stakeholders underneath that could stop him in his tracks. And they weren't going to stop him by overt means. This is the federal difference. They can stop them. They can stop their peers from making progress through pure bureaucracy. I'm just going to say now you have to be 508 compliant, and that'll take you 10 years to prove. I'm just going to say, you need these things, whatever. The politics portion was, you asked a good question about how do you start figuring it out. The only way you start figuring it out is by direct engagement. And this is a hand-to-hand, on-the-field engagement. You have to start interacting with the different groups to see, and it's very important to have situational awareness. They're all going to say they're the top person. My system is the most important system. Maybe, but maybe not. And so you have to do that hand-to-hand, and then you have to be able to step back and start processing, all right, you know what? This system actually is the one that drives everybody else. Or this user is the one that talks to the C-suite, and what he says or she says drives that group. Or this person can be a champion, and if they adopt, everyone else will follow. And that only happens when you engage, because, and you've probably seen this too on the commercial side, it's going to be similar. Federal, it's very, very important that you get the politics right. And it's only hand-to-hand combat where you're going to find it out, hand-to-hand engagement. And you're going to hear the same words from folks, but then you have to assess as the project manager, all right, who's going to be that early adopter that's going to get other people to follow? Who's going to be the influencer that's going to get the rest of leadership to buy into what you're doing? Who is listening to whom else? Right. And so in the project that I'm on right now, my key stakeholder who came in brand new, he was only listening to 2 or 3 guys about whether or not our company was doing what they needed to do. And until those people said, yes, they're doing it, didn't matter what I said. So I don't know if that's tracking in, Rachel, on what you're asking, but that people piece, huge.
So you're sort of like ranking after you've had some conversations, you're sort of ranking sort of where's the perception or like what type of stakeholder, what type of management am I going to do with this person?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm not even ranking, right? Just kind of categorizing. This person's important, but this person is mission critical. This person is an influencer. This group is maybe, they need to be adhered to, and they need to be brought in, and they want to be read in, and they want to be part of the team. No doubt, all those things. But you do have to start discerning. Some of these migrations that we've done over the years, we had a migration, 80 different systems. All right, well, who's the top dog in all that? It was clear about 6 months in who the top dog was and when we could tackle that, but it wasn't clear from day one. And out of a group of 80 systems, it turns out there was really one guy. And if you got that guy converted to be a fan, everything else was going to go. And we didn't know that from day one. Once you knew Greg, no one's going to know who Greg is, but once you knew Greg and he got converted, everything else was going to roll. And people were going to listen to him while you were on the call. And so you had to know that. And that knowledge was gained in the lunchroom, by the way. That's where we found out who's really who.
And I'm curious from like a tactical standpoint, are you sort of just mentally taking those kinds of assessments, or are you formalizing that in any way, either for yourself or with anybody on your like project core team?
That's a good question. You have to do both, I think. So certainly, you over time, you wind up starting to just doing it subconsciously, but you have to help the team because, when you talk about big project energy, kind of the theme here, there's really 2 groups you have to get motivated. There's the client, sure, and all that, but there's the team as well, because they're going to wind up doing the same thing as the client, focusing on stuff that doesn't matter, not paying attention to stuff that does. And so you have to orient the 2 in parallel. Otherwise, we're going to be ignoring the one that matters, paying attention to the one that doesn't. And so some of it's subconscious, but then it needs to be normalized across the team and then normalized with the customer. Here's why we're meeting with this group next. And there's that art form, which you're probably going to hear many times, right? The proper level of communication, you're hitting it right when you are telling people to go to hell and they are asking for directions. Otherwise, forget it. It's not going to happen. And that is really hard.
It is such a dance, very tricky.
It's super tricky. And it is ballroom dancing. Took ballroom dancing 25 years ago. I'm telling you, it's ballroom dancing.
And I'm curious, like one of my favorite things to hear about is it pits of project management war stories, or, some of like the worst situations, and like, just kind of climbing out of that. Do you have any one story or one situation or anything that you can share where it's like you are at the reddest of red statuses, like the sky is falling, like shit is on fire, like you are in the pits of hell? How the hell did you navigate out of that?
So the one I usually reflect on, and this was a number of years ago. So I'd started a big transition, and I started showing up to all the technical meetings. And the technical lead wound up reporting to my program manager, "We need John restricted and no longer attending any meetings." He's laughing. He's like, "Why?" "Well, because he's writing everything down and he's reporting it." So for 30 days, I was on restriction. No technical meetings, could not go to any meetings. That's tough to manage from, by the way. At day 30 or 31, it transitioned back to same technical lead, went to my PM and said, "All right, we need John on all the technical meetings starting tomorrow." He's like, "Why?" "Well, because he writes down everything we say, he reports it, and senior management believes him." That was the transition that had to happen in that program. And it happened for two reasons. We got a boost because we had an inside person, right? We were talking about those stakeholders who matter. We had an inside person. She had been at that agency for 40 years. She knew everybody. And she gave me some key introductions. Said, "This is John. He's really trying to help. You got to let him in." But the other place that happened was in the lunchroom, sitting down with that person who was saying no and just starting to build that relationship. The relationships are key. You can't do it without that. It is a personal contact sport. And I had to build that relationship with him, or he was just going to be denying. And then I couldn't do what they needed me to do, which was help them actually do this massive transition, moving all their systems. And so I went from restricted from all meetings to mandatory in all meetings. In fact, later in that program, he would not start the call unless I was on the call. And it was for the same reason. He knew that whatever I was going to write down, which was going to be what people said, I was going to report it, and his senior leadership was going to know, well, this is what's really going on. They would believe it. So I had to go from not trusted at all to completely trusted in 29 days or whatever it was. That was tough.
Oh,
That was
oh
tough.
my goodness. Man, and you've said multiple times now that some of that transition happened in the lunchroom, which is funny and it makes so much sense. I am curious though, have you had any projects that, that have been kind of more virtual leaning or entirely virtual, where those connections are so much harder, and how does that how do you find sort of the lunchroom experiences in that virtual environment?
Really good question, because that's happening more. In the federal space, it is starting to open up, right? So for COVID period, nothing, right? No one was going anywhere, and it all had to be 100% virtual. It's super tough. Many of them would not even go on camera, so you're not getting any of the visual cues of, are they liking what I'm saying, not liking? That's super tough. The strategy when that happens, especially if it's all virtual and they're not doing cameras, you just have to do 10x the conversations. And even some of the current programs, they are more virtual than not. I don't get down to their office space that often. When you do, it's gold, because that's when you get the before meeting conversation and the after meeting conversation, which is gold. That's what really helps you formulate, right? Who's who and how do I help them manage through this? But when you can't get that, because I've had customers in other states or other regions, you just have to do a lot of conversations, and it might mean two or three different things per day for a long time to start getting those nuances and understanding their look of the world. They're assessing you every time too. All right, do I trust this guy? Because a lot of perception was we're just there to take all that federal money and not really deliver. And you have to disprove that. But with actions, not just by saying it. If you have to say it, it's too late. You got to prove it with actions. Hey, I don't think you should do that. That's going to cost you more money and not get you where you want. You do that a half a dozen times and prove it, that's going to convert them to, oh, this person's really out to help me with my best interests. And that's going to open up a lot of different things. If it's virtual only, it is tough, Rachel, to your point. It is tough.
It's very tough, very tough. On some of the projects that we're working on, again, also virtual, we like go through these Herculean efforts of planning on sites, and sometimes we're bringing 50 to 100 people together, and it's like this big production for the sake of the FaceTime. So it can be really challenging, and coordinating those times, it's still very key. And that can ultimately, I don't know if you find the same thing, but that can ultimately mean my day is longer, or I have just the meeting blocks are crazy because it's like, oh, I just need a quick chat with this person, or I need a quick one-on-one with this person, or I didn't like their tone in that meeting, so I need to schedule a meeting to see if they're okay. So it's just a lot of calendar management as well.
You have to do all of it. And I usually get a lot of, John, how are you saying you're doing 10 meetings a day? Well, it's required because some of it is only 5-10 minutes to get, let's track in on this. Or were you saying the same thing? But you're right. Your plan for the day that goes right out the window 5 minutes into the day, depending on what happens. You just have to be able to redact and adapt as needed, because it's going to be important if it came up. And if someone's got something they're saying it's hot, well, then it probably is in their minds. And you're going to have to adapt to that. And the on sites can be very problematic because you're going to come up with this gorgeous minute by minute plan of what you're going to do. And all of that might go out the window in the first 10 minutes. If that's what needs to happen, that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, you're like bringing me back to like all the days where you're thinking, "Oh, I have a pretty easy day today,"
Yeah.
or "Oh,
Yeah.
plan's good for the day," and then, plans change so quickly. It's funny. I I really want to this is kind of bringing up for me, like, I really want to dip into some of your kind of longevity of experience, because I really think that the way that we think about project management and program management has evolved so much over time. And I really see, it's probably really only in the last, like, we'll say maybe 10 to 20 years that project management has like started to really come up as like a huge profession, and really like only recently has really taken off as this like big kind of emerging practice, or and emerging profession. And I've seen a lot of estimates, that say, oh my gosh, there's going to be such a deficit of project managers by 2030 and all these things. So I'm just curious how you've seen the evolution happen over
No,
time.
and that's a really good point, Rachel. I think it has evolved. To your point, the key things that have changed, I think, right, it used to be, right, the PMBOK was the standard and you do things this way and you just follow these particular things. I would argue, and maybe it's just from my own personal experience, the things that I used to think that mattered, right, a structured status report and red, green, yellow, and all those things don't matter. I would argue you could probably distill it down to maybe a half a dozen things. The things that matter, not necessarily in this order, but listening skills. Like, I mean, really listening skills. What's the emotion? What's driving why they're saying it that way versus the way they said it yesterday? If you listen to some of the studies about, listening, right, you've probably done some reading too. The FBI has 5 people listening. One is just listening for emotion. One's listening for the words they use and don't use. What's their state of mind? All this different listening, because everything matters. I would argue the relationship building skill is fundamental. If you can't do that, it doesn't matter how good your technical plan is. It doesn't matter how good your technical delivery is. When things get screwed up, they will crucify you if you don't have the relationship. And that means a trusted advisor relationship. And then you made the comment earlier, you have to be able to get shit done, period. You have to be able to get stuff done. That was not, I don't think, as much a focus 20, 30 years ago. It was like, well, you just follow the plan, and whether or not, and the plan is going to be very, very, very agile, because what mattered what I used to tell people, if it's a year long schedule, or what we know 60 days in is completely different than what we knew on day 0. And at day 120, now everything we knew at 60 wasn't right. It's this. And at day 240, it's different again. So it is going to change as you get smarter about what really matters. But those things
And then
align.
how do you balance that against, stakeholders that either haven't been maybe as involved through the process, or have like some kind of arbitrary date in their mind. And we get that a lot in corporate, is somebody just kind of looks at the calendar and says, October feels right, let's go live in October. you know
Yeah. Well, they
that
do pick
that
them
feels
out of
like
the
about the
they totally
right amount of time.
they totally pick it out of air. And I used to fight about it with customers before. And I've decided that it's less difficult to not fight, but demonstrate with truth. So I'm a big fan of project because it's a truly predictive model, right? And it has to be reflective of what you're doing, predictive, and it has to be changeable. So typically now, you tell me whatever bogus date you want. I will make a schedule that shows exactly that date. And I'll have the linkage of the critical path of those things. As soon as things start coming up, all those things that I said were risks are now issues. Forget risk management. All right. Most of the time, they just accept the risk because they can't actually fix it. Hey, we needed that thing 6 months ago. Hey, we needed that thing 6 weeks ago. If I go back to one of those older customers, I vividly remember at Christmas time having to replan an entire schedule that had a whole year's worth of work. We had an auditorium with 60 people in there, and I'm literally rebuilding the schedule in front of them. But I just used facts and data. If I keep it to just facts and data, hey, we thought this was going to take 6 weeks, but I'm on week 5.9, and you're 4 to 5 weeks from making a decision that you need to make. And then I would just ask them with the auditorium with 100 people in there or 50 people, whatever, how long do you think that's going to take? Oh, 4 more weeks. Okay. And I would change it because then you can let the tool just kind of show them, well, look, if it's 4 weeks from now and it's not going to be tomorrow, here's your new future date. Well, John, what does that do to the other milestones? Well, let's look. Oh, look, they all moved out 4 weeks based on what you just told me. The period we just finished, I was 90 days late on a 90-day schedule. And they were elated because there was a bunch of stuff that we had to add in that they didn't know and didn't tell us. Bunch of technical debt that if it didn't get fixed, wasn't going to do it. So now I just build the schedule they want to see. Here's the one you want to see. If all 50 of these assumptions are correct and all of these linkages are correct and there's no deviation from this, you can have it exactly on the day you want. As soon as things start changing, then I'm going to change it in the schedule. This isn't a blame thing. I don't care why it happened. Oh, nobody knew about these 5 things. Each one of them is 3 days. Well, that's 15 days difference in what we thought. It is very hard for them to be upset about it when I'm just using facts. And it's very hard for them to be upset if I don't get into, well, you didn't even tell me this. How come you didn't know? Just keep it all very impersonal. This is just data. We're just laying out timelines here. Now, sometimes, right, they have these hard dates that they think they have to hit for one reason or another. And then that's where the politics that you mentioned earlier, Rachel, becomes very important. Who thinks it's that date or nothing and why? And then how do you help either influence the influencers around that or use the data to convey why it's not going to happen? Because most of the time, everyone understands why things don't go. If you're really clear and simple about it, this is not like, you can obfuscate all the data in a very complicated project schedule if you want, but mine are very simple these days, maybe 200 lines max, because I need them to see the big picture very quickly.
What I'm really taken by from everything you just said is two major things. One is the work that was done in advance to build that timeline is key, right?
It's to
Because
happen.
if you don't have that baseline kind of handshake with everyone that this is the plan, then what everything that you just said about making changes in front of their face, like they're gonna like pick apart, like they're gonna spend more time picking apart the credibility of the timeline itself rather than dealing with the consequences. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I am really intrigued by, or I'll just say something that really resonated with me, is just knowing like what level of detail to put in is something that really does just come from so much experience. And when I work with any new project managers, this concept, I call it though, like what has to be true timeline. When somebody picks a date, I'm kind of building out, okay, what has to be true in order for us to hit that date, kind of said another way. But oftentimes when I'm talking to a brand new project manager, they're looking at me and they'll say, yeah, I could put that together, but it's a lie. Like I'm lying right now. And I think it's really interesting, when you start to put all these things together, you say, okay, yes. When we've all sat down, we put it all together. This is what has to be true. You can talk about the risks all day long, but we have to all shake hands and say, okay, if you want to hit that date, we put together all these things that need to line up, in order for this thing to happen.
It's I think to highlight what you're saying though, Rachel, it's finding the right level of friction, right? So there's two kinds, right? If you don't have enough friction, right, then I have a schedule that nobody believes and they're going to question everything I have in there. If I have all the truth, all the real friction, again, now they're going to question, well, why should it take so long? It's not going to take us that long. And so you just got to find that happy medium. And then I'm more comfortable just adding in where the extra reality comes in. But it is definitely a struggle to find that simple balance, right? So that you can get enough of the truth about, all right, here's what you told me all the big things are. And then you have to help them understand those changes when they happen. And again, that gets to the listening skills and the relationship part. The current customer had no idea how much technical debt they had. So of course they made assumptions and we made assumptions. And of course we were all wrong. But by incrementally adding in the extra truth that needed to happen, it just made it easier for people to process. Did all of them like it? No. But you can't argue with math. Well, 5 days plus 5 days, that turns out to be 10 days. Could we make that 3? You could, if you can tell me you can meet that new date. But if you can't meet it, and I'm happy to put 3, but when it's not 3 and it turns into 9 or 15 or whatever, I'm going to change it real time. Do I think it's going to be 3 days? No, I don't. But why argue about it there? I'll put in 3, but on day 3, I'm going to be checking the clock. And if it's not done, I have to move this out. And after a while, that's part of what converted that technical lead from Rigoli reports the truth and they believe him. That's part of what converted him, because he would say he was delayed and they wouldn't believe him. He would say it's impacting the schedule and they wouldn't believe him. And then he realized, damn it, that's why Rigoli wrote all that down and kept changing stuff. And that's when he said he's got to be in all the meetings again. That was part of it, because he spent 30 days arguing with leadership about date changes. They didn't believe anything he was telling them, even though he actually was right and he was telling them the truth. He needed somebody to do it in a way that management was going to process. And that was that change in the schedule.
That's
So
it.
it's part of the hard part. And you're right. It is very difficult to get someone newer, not experienced, to understand that nuance. And I used to do it myself. I had my piece de resistance was a project schedule with 50 schedules, all interrelated, 35,000 tasks and milestones. It was gorgeous. Nobody could process what I was doing. Nobody knew what it meant. My slipping tasks was 100 pages long every day. Useless. So you got to find that balance that's going to work for that customer. And that does it's just practical experience. The more you've done it, it'll become easier. It's never easy. And you're never right on the first time. No way.
This is going to be like the nerdiest project management question ever, but can you talk about the relationship between like a timeline and an action log? Do you keep actions outside of the timeline, or do you put all of your actions into the
No,
timeline?
this is a really good topic, and it's not geeky because we run into this all the time. And I have, as a newer, right, when I was a brand new project manager, I thought everything had to go in that schedule. Every bloody thing was in there, the meetings, everything. And that winds up being so much data that you can't consume it. Underneath it is an action tracker of here's the 15 things that need to happen. They're not going to happen in any order that I can predict. And some of those things are iterative. If you're building a document or a standard operating procedure, you're not going to do that on day 1 we wrote it and on day 2 we did revisions. That's not how that works, ever. They're going to be iterating that thing 17 times. And I used to literally put in, well, they'll do 3 versions. No, stupid. So you have to have the things that depict the overall milestones and timeline. Okay, they're going to need to do this body of things, right? In the work breakdown, I need this big body of thing done. You're going to have to do development. You can't tell me what it is. You can't tell me how long it's going to take exactly. I'm going to make guesses on dates that you're not going to like, Mr. and Mrs. Developer, but I got to declare that. Underneath that, you might have to tell me, and I'll have to report out weekly. Here's this other thing we didn't think about. They thought they were only going to modify 3 parts of the database. It's 22 parts. That's going to take longer. So you have to have both pieces, and you can make an argument, and I think a good one. If you take some of the more modern approaches, right? Agile is going to tell me what I don't need to schedule. Yeah, you do, because customers want to know dates. Schedule is going to say, well, I don't need Agile. Yeah, you do, because there's a whole bunch of influx things that you have to manage, and you need to be moving stuff from the left to the right. And when you have a certain number of those things done, you can say, okay, I'm at the next step, and now I can do the next thing. And it's not that one supersedes or overlaps the other. Experience is going to help you do that better because you have to have both things. I need a high level timeline where we're hitting dates, not hitting dates, and why that is. But underneath that, there's probably a lot of details that I do not want to manage in a schedule anymore because it just turns the thing into a wreck and nobody can read it. So it's not a geeky question. That's actually a real practical question about how what I've learned in 28 years is you have to have those two things, or you got a timeline that nobody knows what the hell's going on and details that nobody knows how the hell they're connected. And you have to connect those things, which is more art than science. I get it, but you have to do that.
Couldn't agree more. And thank you for that. Something that's been coming up a lot for us is so, okay, we've got our timeline, we've got our action items, and especially if you're sitting, kind of higher up in the program management structure, you are kind of treading this world where you need to be extremely high level, extremely strategic, but then there are also times where you have a very difficult client or a difficult stakeholder or something like that. There's just some, like, we'll call it babysitting, call it hand holding, call it dragging them along, where, you have to get very tactical. It can be hard, especially if you're someone that's newer, doesn't have the experience, to know what are the things that I need to get tactical and handhold on. What are the things where I need to kind of keep it higher level?
You have that challenge all the time. And the politically correct, right, is stakeholder management. 2 projects ago, we had a stakeholder. He felt he was very technical, totally understood the technology, did not understand the technology. Even higher, in the program level, whatever that, you still have to have your fingers deep enough that you understand enough to help detangle some of that. Because he was making statements all the time, it works like this, and that was fine. And that was where you get into judgment call about, all right, he is my stakeholder, but he's not actually the influencer on this thing. And we, in some cases, and this gets very tricky. This is nuanced project management. He's my key stakeholder, but I need to manage the 4 people around him who are actually influenced getting things done. And you have to do that artfully, because it's not like, hey, I'm going to ignore you now because you're not doing this right. And he still needed to feel in charge. This is the artful form. I needed him to be asking for directions every day. And to your comment, though, it is important, because if I don't understand enough of the basics, when I am face to face with the stakeholder, I'm not bringing in 22 technical people now to explain all this. I've done that. That's a big mistake. Then everyone gets distracted about things that don't matter. And that's why you do have to have enough understanding. I never have to understand the technologies. What I do need is enough understanding about the solution where we're going so that my depiction of the timeline is right. I understand enough about the underlying pieces that I can help explain it and get people through it. And that's, again, it's an experience thing again. I used to, read all the manuals and I don't do that anymore. I can't. But I have to know enough about what's going on to help, 2 calls today. All right, the customer said all these things. Yeah, but the only things that actually matter are this one and this one. How do you know that? Because of the other 72 conversations we've had. And these themes always come up. Yeah, you're right. I know. Let's do that. Let's focus on that. And you are going to make mistakes, and that's fine. That's fine. But you got to build up that acumen over time, and you're not going to get better without trying it and doing it.
Couldn't agree more. It's like the 10,000 hours thing, right? You get your experience through trial by fire.
Yep. That's the only way, and it's painful at times, and you're going to make huge mistakes, and that's fine. Don't fail fatal.
Don't fail. That's really, I think there's something to that. What are you kind of have to know, like, what are your sort of drop dead points, or what are the guardrails you have for yourself, where it's like, if nothing else, we need to get, these certain things done, or these certain pieces.
Yeah, and part of it you'll get from your customer, right? They will start with some of that, but then you have to discern, even with some of the ones you're talking about, Rachel, you have to discern, all right, this one they can give, this one, no give, right? This one's literally do or die. This is it. Some of these, there's more give than they think. And you have to do some testing as you have those interactions with the customers to figure out which ones can they give, which ones are they going to sacrifice completely when you build that first unrealistic schedule, right, which of these things are going to just completely fall by the wayside? You don't know that right away. As you get more nuanced with your customer, if you're really, really listening to their underlying fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that's what's really going to drive things. Because let's face it, they will be making decisions based on emotions. They're going to talk logic all they want. It's all emotional at the end of the day. What am I going to get in trouble for with my boss? Let me help my customer avoid that, and I'm more likely to get that trusted advisor. You know what, Mrs. Customer, this is what they're going to get mad at you about. Yeah, that's going to get me. Yeah, let's avoid that. These things, nobody's going to care at the end of the day. We'll deliver them and we'll do them, but let's do an 80-20. We'll do 20% of the energy, 80% of the value. Federal government is famous for those big 3-ring binders. They all want them. A lot of times hard copy cracks me up. You can go into rooms full of these things. You better deliver it,
That's
but
that's
don't.
never that's never once been opened ever.
You can see the dust, right? You can figure out what age. It's like counting rings in a tree, but you got to do them. But don't get hung up on them. Don't get stuck on them. And I used to get hung up on the perfection of those things. Nobody ever reads them. So, team, we're going to deliver it. But John, this page 52 is wrong. No one's going to get to page 52. They're going to see how heavy it was. All right, it's heavy. Move on. Some of the things though are going to matter. And you got to and that experience of discerning which ones to pay attention to, which ones not. It is easy to get buried. The challenge of this job is getting buried. It's very easy to get buried because if you don't have experience, you're going to concentrate on everything. Impossible. You're going to try and be perfectionist about everything. Impossible. You're going to not have grace with yourself, your team, and your customer. That's a failure. That's a fatal failure. You just got to be more balanced about it.
That's I mean, that's it. That's basically all of it is just manage the stakeholders, get your relationships in place and get to the root of what's important so that you can deliver on those things. I mean, that's really kind of the
Yeah,
meat
you
and
know you're
potatoes
doing it
of it.
right when you don't deliver what they said, but you deliver what they need and they're super happy. That's when you know you got there. And that was our last period in performance. We didn't do any of the things they said, not one. But they were super, super happy. They had a party with a cake. They were so happy. Didn't do anything that was on that original timeline. Not a thing. But plenty of stuff that they actually cared about, they just didn't know.
I think that is such a good point and so interesting because, we're both kind of in this consulting world, right? And what I think is so interesting is there are like a lot of really bad project managers and bad consultants.
Yeah,
And I have seen so many, and we've done like, sort of rescue projects where we've done so many projects where like, there's kind of two camps of, I'll call them like kind of, bad methodology. One is they're like a one trick pony and they can only do their one thing. And if you deviate, like, that's a problem.
they're
And
dead.
then, right. And then we have the other camp, which is the tell me what to do camp. And it's so funny because of what you're saying now, which is if you follow that and you actually do what they asked for,
They're going to be mad.
they wouldn't even like the result.
They'll be furious. Why did you give me this? Well, that's kind of what you described, and I did what you said. They're not really looking for that, but they won't say it either. Most stakeholders are not going to say. I've not had any major stakeholder say, "You come in and tell me what to do, and I'll be perfectly happy." They never say that. They know what they need. They know what they want. And you have to ask yourself, well, if that's all true, then you don't actually need me because you know everything. And that's not really true. Whether or not they consciously recognize it or not hardly matters. But the art form of what we've talked about in this conversation is understanding that going in, helping them get there in a face saving way. I don't need to tell them they don't know. I never need to tell them they don't know. We're just going to let these facts unfold, right? We're going to make an update on the critical path and look at what we found together. We're geniuses. and let them take credit. I don't care. Let them take credit. The amount of people that show up at the end of a successful project is hilarious. That took me a while to get over, by the way. Probably 20 years of, wow, this guy, he never, who cares? Who cares at the end of the day?
That's actually so refreshing because I think anyone who's worked with project managers, especially I'll say those earlier in their career, that if you go in with any kind of ego,
You can
it's
leave your
painful.
ego downstairs behind, never take it out of the suitcase, and you'll be better off. Just never take it out.
Couldn't agree more. But yeah, it is a hard lesson for a lot to
Super
learn.
hard, and people want to talk about logic and how things should go and what should happen, and it doesn't matter. You just got to go with the flow on these things.
So just to kind of bring us full circle, and as we kind of start to wrap up, you briefly touched on it early on, but we've been playing around a lot with this concept of like big project energy and all the just piles and piles of shit that goes into doing project management well. When you heard that, can you tell me like what came to mind or like what you think of when if we're kind of talk about big project energy?
Yeah, I think so. If I think about some of the big transitions that I've done, big project energy. So I wrote a couple of notes about it because we talked about it briefly before as well. Big project energy. You have to have, and we've talked about some of these things. You have to have everything ready, right? You have to have a overall timeline, milestones. You have to have a plan of what you're going to do, which is going to change massively. You have to be ready to iterate how your team is structured, what you're focused on, all those things. But be prepared for what do I tell people? A year long project, it'll be 90 days before you're actually making any kind of real progress and you understand what matters. At least 90 days. So you'll be focused on all the wrong things for 89 days. Be ready to pivot quickly and effectively. And you have to find those small wins. It's not always lowest hanging fruit. Sometimes it's influential fruit. Sometimes it's the stakeholder that's going to convince other stakeholders. Sometimes it's an early adopter champion. Find those early small wins, and they are a combination of those things. And when you get those, then momentum can happen. And then the team starts feeling big project energy. Well, this is actually working. We didn't think this would work. Yeah, the customer will start feeling the big project energy. Oh, they're actually starting to move these systems. We thought that would never happen. The stakeholders who sponsored the thing are going to start feeling that big project energy. Oh, they're actually achieving things that we didn't think we would achieve. And so that it starts really, really small. And then I'm going to relate it to scouts, right? So I was a scout master for 10 years. When you're teaching scouts to start fires in the rain, it's not what they think it is. You don't get out a flamethrower and start just, you don't throw big logs on there. You start with these tiny, tiny, tiny twigs, the smallest things you can, and you very slowly start building it up. Throw too much on there, you're going to suffocate the thing and it's going to go out. Throw too little on there, it's going to burn out because there's no more fuel. But you have to build that very slowly, and it is an incremental process. It is a deliberate process. It is a patient process to get to where you have that big project energy. Then nothing gets in your way. Then even the most stubborn stakeholder has to eventually roll because there's too much momentum. Then the system that nobody thinks can or should move has to move because there's too much momentum. And when you have that, the team has big project energy, the customers have big project energy, the stakeholders have it. That's when you get to the conclusion of these massive transition efforts that take sometimes a couple years. But you have to build that. It's just like that little fire. You have to build it very, very slowly, carefully, consciously. Don't ignore it. Don't suffocate it. It's a balanced process.
That was beautiful. Thank you for that.
Lessons
I
from scouting.
I
Lessons from scouting.
I love that so much because I think that really is tangible and kind of speaks to the finesse as well. It's that process that does take that skill. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for agreeing to do this. And thank you
Well,
for this great conversation. This has been absolutely wonderful. For all the folks online, I know we have your connections and we'll include that in all the show notes, but where can folks find you?
so I don't have anything formal set up. I'm still working under an employer right now, but certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've got my email out there. I'll figure out how to set up other things. But if you've got questions, especially about Project, my favorite tool, let me know. Happy to talk about it.
Amazing. Thank you again. Really appreciate it. Uh, to everyone listening, this has been really fun. I'm so glad we could talk to John. We'll probably bring John back to talk about some of this some more because we
Happy to
really
talk about it.
nerded out. Yeah, we really nerded out on some like really kind of in-depth project management topics. So thank you again, and thanks everyone for listening.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.